And welcome back, fam bam, to another installment of Metaphysics on Your Mind. First off, we just wanted to thank everyone once again for the wonderful support, the comments, subscribing, the thumbs up, or even just checking it out. Again, we clearly have to acknowledge that for a great number of people, the information or the that we've been conveying may be you know unorthodox, relative to what your particular background might be. And really underpinning this whole thing, at least in my view, is results, right? Whether you would consider yourself a religious person, or, you go to church regularly or temple or whatever. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. If you're getting results with whatever you practice, and you are becoming, if this is of course something that's of interest to you, but if you are becoming a better version of yourself through whatever particular practice that you may participate in or believe in or whatever, hallelujah. I mean, that's what it's all about. But there may be some people who say maybe they grew up in say the church or a particular religion or whatever, and for whatever the reason might be for them, it didn't click the way that it might have or does for others. Because again, we are unique. The Most High Creator, or highest consciousness, or highest energy, the source of all things, of all that ever can be, ever will be, ever is, we have been granted this experience that we call life. And I would say that when we talked about the chakras, and about, quote unquote, you've heard the term falling from grace, falling into our lower natures, which is where many of us find ourselves to this day. The goal has to be to connect you to that which is of the higher, right? So if whatever your practice is, whatever your persuasion is, if it is able to connect you in a experiential, in other words, a real way, with that which we call the higher self or the Most High or God, or however you want to frame it, if you don't have a personal relationship with that mysterious energy that we call God, or that we call the higher consciousness, the creative source. If you don't have a personal relationship, then you must have perhaps an intellectual relationship. And we submit that this is not about the intellectual. The intellectual is actually is part and parcel of the flesh, right? Which is why we say in meditation, you're separating from the emotions and the intellect from the flesh, from the five sense reality, right? That's what, the Pentecost, the Penta 5, it's that the five senses is symbolic of the flesh. So the relationship that we have, this is what we propose. The relationship that one would have with the higher, if it is not a relationship that is functional, I'm meaning active, then it's more of an intellectual exercise. And there might be some emotion to it or whatever, but we know about the lower emotions and the higher inspiration. They're not necessarily the same thing. So this, again, we're talking about if, and I know, for instance, in my case, when you have endured, which practically all of us have, various kinds of suffering or trauma or displacement, right, in your life. If you suffered that, then it stands to reason that you want to be healed from the effects of that trauma that you may still be living with, that may be repressed with the shadow, okay? The shadow self. That's what this is, what we're trying to do is, in understanding how energy works, we are saying that if it works for you, then great. But for a number of people, a particular religious practice or some other ascetic practice may not have been as effective as they would like it to have been. Points of reference say that we must be open to some kind of an investigation of other or alternative ways of the divine expressing itself through our experience, right? It's not an intellectual thing, okay? It's experiential. The experience of a connection with the divine is not the same as rationalizing an intellectual explanation of what you think the divine is. See, in its effective form, we propose that it is experiential. It has to work within your consciousness, within your being. One would think that that is one of our mandates in our individual lives, because we are all unique, that there must be a unique relationship that we can all have with that from which we come, from the divine, from God. It is an individualized, internal relationship relative to the flesh, okay? It is not something that can be replicated externally. The external can remind us of what we are attempting to experience when we go into communion with God, or we want to pray to God. We want to get on the same frequency as God, right? But the universe has taught us, speaking of quantum physics and energy or what have you, that, again, it is about frequency and waveform, okay? Vibration, okay? Lower vibrational things are not resonant with higher vibrational things, and vice versa, okay? That's part of the science or laws of the cosmos that we've discovered. The law of correspondence. As above, so below. Or as in the higher mind, so in the lower. Right? As within, so without. Whatever energy that you're expressing through your vehicle, through yourself, okay, you can give it an intent. So you are a creative or destructive force by default. So we're learning, how do these processes work? Is it just something that we can boil down into a little story, a little a little metaphor, an allegory, and we're supposed to be able to extrapolate from that? Or is it trying to do something that I would propose, that we propose, is of more importance? Because we can all differ on, what's this and what's that and how do you interpret. We can differ, reasonable minds can differ. But I would say that whether it's a religion or whether it's a personal practice, that the path is always from within, okay? So if whatever you're doing is pointing you back within, then you're probably on the right track. Because if you point back within yourself, then what happens as a corollary to that is that you then become a responsible party. You have to take responsibility for the decisions you've made and how the results came about, what your intentions were. See, it's easy to lay back into a system of sentiments, which is another way of saying, say, a religion. And relying on that, or at least the idea of that, hey, if I'm doing that and I do my, I'm there every week or every other whatever day, I'm doing all of that. That's showing that, hey, I'm doing the right thing, right? Well, again, it's an individualized internal thing. If the religious practice or spiritual practice that you engage in points you back to yourself, that the path is through yourself, I'd say, hey, okay, again, it's working for you. Because what that does is it makes you responsible. You can't shift the nature of things off on some religious denomination and say, because I'm doing this, I'm good. No, it doesn't work that way. See? You can practice whatever you want to practice, but if it's not turning you within, if you're not becoming the responsible party for how you utilize your energy, right? Your gifts from the Most High, given whatever deficits you may think you have, I'm not tall enough, or I'm not this enough, and I'm not smart enough, or whatever. The reality is that the mind, the perception that we receive through the mind is the world to us, right? That's why we talk about co-creation. No, you didn't create yourself, but you're the co-creator of how yourself experiences this life, okay? Along with the divine, or in cases of those who, decide they want to take a walk on the wild side, then, you can go that way too. Okay, but the reality is you're going to come back to the same thing. It all comes back to the self. Okay, and that's what this is saying, is that in coming back to the self, if you are able to have a internalized relationship that then by default is going to be manifested and projected into the physical. Remember, we said thoughts become things. The spiritual precedes the material. Whatever is happening in the invisible world will become manifest, right? Just different energetic forms. So when you go within, in fact, let's read this quick verse and then we'll wrap this up. This is Matthew 18, 2-5. And I think this is what we're talking about, because I would say, at least for myself, and I'm sure for 99 point whatever percent of people, that our environments, our genetics, we all know that all of that is a mix that produces at least who we think we are. There's no doubt that we all have suffered various kinds of, trauma and pain and hurt, and we have all kinds of justifications for why, or we don't have answers. But when you go within, right? when you go within, there's, and you're truly going within, there's no trickery, right? With you and the divine, in order for you to get on that frequency, to be on that frequency, when you get to that frequency, there's no trickery, there's no ego, there's no hidden motive. You are releasing. So there are different types of meditation. We've been talking primarily about the no thought or watching meditation, because the ultimate goal is to release and separate. But after we release and separate, once we become practiced at that, letting go, purging, releasing, looking at it, however, emotional it might make us, then we can release it. We can release it to the universe. We can release it to God. We can release it. Okay? That's the point. But you can't do that externally, right? It's not a public thing. That doesn't happen in a group of 1,000 people. You might get emotions in a group of 1,000 people, but that's not what this is about. It's not about emotions, because emotions is about the flesh. It is about separating from the illusions that are created by our five senses, and that tell us who we think we are, whether we're worthy or whether we're not worthy. Those rituals, the external rituals, can help point you back to your spiritual nature. But in my perspective, they cannot do the job for you. That has to be done by you, within you, is what I would propose. That's, what the great teachers have always taught. Okay? It's not, we can fellowship and that's all fine. But fellowship does not replace the internalization of this process of transmuting what was once negative or dark into light, into taking, lemons and making lemonade, right? Because it's about perspective. It's about, how does these energy transferences work, and how do they make us feel? And what is the result of when energy is manipulated by us or against us? See, you can call this stuff hocus pocus, you could call it this, you could call it that, but that doesn't make it true or not true. You have to have a point of reference. You have to have somewhat of an investigation, and usually the best way to do that is to go within, because that's the real deal, right? That's when you collapse that ego, right? When Cain, as we talked about, the ego or Cain, when Cain is symbolically killed, when the lamb is sacrificed, the cerebrum, the head, the brain, okay, the logical mind, when that sacrifice happens, the energy of diversion and of delusion of the ego is dissolved, so that you can have a real communion with the Most High, right? The soul you, not the mental you. That's what we're going to try to heal, right? But we need to get to that soul. We need to get to that which is of God. We need to get to the child of God, which is the soul, not the flesh. This flesh is a vehicle to last for, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, whatever. Okay? It is a vehicle for experiences that the soul is longing for. Okay? The soul, because the soul is eternal. Or at least we propose that. That's what Genesis told us. If you're of God, and God is eternal, and you are God's child, then you are eternal. But it's not the flesh. And again, we'll get into the whole thing when we talk about, reincarnation or whatever. But we're just coming back to the point of all this, is that if you're, none of this is really that important if it isn't something that can give you an alternative way of understanding the phenomena of life and of your experience of life. Okay, that's the value of it. Okay, it's not a nursery rhyme or whatever to be memorized, or these sometimes platitudes that we kind of toss around to each other. It's a real experience that we have with that from which we come, where we go naked within. Right? We come naked. We don't have the fig leaves of the ego. The Most High doesn't care about your money, doesn't care about your cars, doesn't care about your fame, doesn't care about your houses, doesn't care about how many men or women you got, right? That's of no consequence. Those are all potentially illusions. And I mean, you can attempt, to paper over all your insecurities, all your wounds with, whether it be degrees and accreditations and certifications and this and that and the other. And at the end of the day, if there's a void here, if there's a disconnect, it's fig leaves, right? But when you go within, okay, there's no subterfuge, right? You are naked. You are stripped naked. And I think this probably says it a little bit more succinctly, and then we're going to wrap this up. It's actually Matthew 18, 1 through 5 in the New Testament. And then we'll wind this up. This is Matthew 18, 1 through 5. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus called to a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them. Now, I'm just going to stop it right there. So you can read that literally, that Jesus or Yeshua, however you want to refer to him, is literally setting a little child in the midst of the disciples, or as we said through our symbolism and metaphor, we said that these are the disciples here, and then these 12 pairs of cranial nerves are the disciples here, as above, so below. And the little child, remember we said that from the virgin mind comes the child of promise, the little lamb, right, without blemish, the child of light, right? Setting the child in the midst of them, in the midst of the 12, in the midst of the 12. See, in that meditation, in the midst of those 12 pairs of cranial nerves, okay, the child of promise is set in the midst of them. In here, we propose. Let's read on. 18:3. And said, Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive me and a little child in my name receiveth me. That little child, when we talk about being born again, being renewed, that can only happen when you go into communion and you release. And you basically say, hey, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. I have no solutions. My ego can't solve this. My rational mind can't solve what ails me, what has not been healed. I've been able to function and go throughout the world and put a facade up and hide that so that I could go through my day and many would be none the wiser. But deep down, we know when there's a wound or a void, we just may not be able to connect the dots to the cause. That can be buried. So that's why we say when you go into meditation, okay, you are releasing, you are purging, you are becoming as a little child. In other words, all that phony, fake stuff that we think about ourselves, the ego and what we have and what we've accomplished and blah, 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 all that gets stripped away, okay? It's like Adam and Eve back in the Garden of Eden before they put on coats of skins, we're going to say symbolically, before they tried to hide themselves in thought and judgment, okay? When you become as a little child, as a child of promise, coming from the virgin mind, we said there's no other way to have a virgin mind but to separate from the flesh, to not have intercourse between the thoughts and emotions of the flesh. You are a virgin and you have an immaculate conception. See, it doesn't happen physically out here. It happens internally in here when all is wiped away, and now the divine can help you to heal so that you can move forward with your life in a way that you were not able to do prior to that. But we'll get more into that. Anyway, again, we want to thank everybody on this journey, on this exploration that we're doing. And yeah, it's real. Once again, thank you.